Hi students, this is Ryan Reagan, the founding partner of HKExcel. So if you're watching this video right now, I suppose you're feeling very confused about how to write your TOK essay. Okay, I understand the situation that you're in because I used to be an IB student. Back then when I was an IB student, I was extremely confused by the TOK subject. And when I asked my teacher, my TOK teacher at the time, she was a professor, she was actually a doctor, and I asked her, so how do I actually write this? I'm so confused. And she's like, oh, I'm not allowed to tell you. The IB doesn't allow me to tell you. And so basically she never taught us anything, right? She just told us to figure it out ourselves. Maybe your school teacher is like that as well. So that's why I'm making this video, to hopefully give you some clues, okay, to really help you. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to teach you how to write a grade A TOK essay in just 4 hours, okay? I created a sample essay with our TOK experts at HKExcel. So in this video, I'm going to go through the level 7 sample with you paragraph by paragraph. So by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to construct your TOK essay, and you'll also know what kind of arguments to include, okay? But of course, only use this video as a reference because you cannot plagiarize, okay? But this video will really give you a clear idea. So to start, because there are several essay prompts, so this is the one that our team chose to answer, okay? So our TOK team consists of IB students who in the past, IB graduates who in the past got over 40 out of 45, okay? And now, so we're making this video together. We created a sample essay that we're going to go through with you in this video. So paragraph by paragraph, you understand how to construct a TOK essay, you understand how to get top marks, okay? So the question we're going to answer is, avoiding bias seems a commendable goal, but this fails to recognize the positive role that bias can play in the pursuit of knowledge. Discuss this statement with reference to 2 areas of knowledge, okay, clear? So this is the prompt that we're answering. Okay, and by the way, so as I said, we created a level 7 sample. If you want the sample, you can actually, if you see this video on Instagram, you can DM us, or if you're watching this on YouTube, there will be a link in the description, okay, or on Facebook or whatever. Okay, so you can download a the sample essay that we have. Okay, it's an essay outline. Okay. Also, so before we start, just to introduce a bit about ourselves, we are HKExcel. We are a leading IB tutoring company in Hong Kong, right? So if you whether you're living in Hong Kong or overseas, if you need help on any of your IB subjects, you can go on a website and you can register for a trial lesson, okay, to check us out. Okay, so now let's begin. So let's look at the rubric first because we want to know what the IB is really looking for. Okay, so you can see there are 5 levels. To get the top level, right, the first component, it says there is a sustained focus on knowledge questions connected to the prescribed title, developed with investigations of different perspectives and linked effectively to areas of knowledge and ways of knowing. Okay, so what does this mean? Because back then when I was an IB student, I did not even know what are knowledge questions. I did not even know what were areas of knowledge or ways of knowing, okay? So knowledge question just refers to questions that relates to how knowledge is obtained, right? So because TOK, what is TOK? TOK is basically we want to explore how knowledge is developed, okay? That's what the subject is about. And knowledge questions are essentially questions that explore how knowledge are created. So basically, you have this essay prompt. What you have to do is you need to develop knowledge questions that answers the essay prompt, and then you answer the knowledge questions yourself. Okay, so you develop knowledge questions that helps you to answer the knowledge prompt. So you need to come up with knowledge questions, and you need to focus on 2 areas of knowledge. 2 areas of knowledge means subject areas, right? And you need to refer to the ways of knowing as well. Okay, so later you'll see when we dissect this paragraph by paragraph, you'll see what this means if you're still not clear, right? And then the second one is the quality of analysis of the knowledge questions. So the arguments are clear, supported by effective real-life examples. So you need to have real-life examples. And implications are drawn. So you don't just state real-life examples. You need to, so what, right? So after you state a real-life example, you need to explain why is that significant. What does it mean? Okay. So a good essay, positive characteristics, right? Accomplished, like well-structured, individual. So it needs to be somewhat unique and insightful, right? So that's why I suggest you use this video as a reference, but don't copy it, because if everybody copies it, like, because our videos, we can get a lot of views, right? Like over 10,000. If everyone copies it, then your essay is not going to be that unique, right? So so that's why you want to come up with your own examples that are unique. It will help you to get a better mark, right? But this video will really give you a direction. Okay, so now let's look at the structure of the TOK essay that we believe is the best. Okay, so if you follow the structure, this already gives you a good score, like a basic good score, I would say. Of course, you need to have good content as well, but at least if you follow the structure, your essay will be well structured, and that's one of the criteria. Okay, that the teachers will look for, right? You have a very structured essay. Okay, so this is the structure we will suggest for you. The first paragraph, just introduce the essay prompt. Okay, so you can say something like, so in this essay we're going to be exploring the essay prompt, and then just restate the essay prompt. Okay, then you define the key terms, okay, in the essay prompt. Okay, well, by the way, we're going to show you paragraph by paragraph what we're going to write later. Okay, so I'm going to give you an outline first. Then you state your areas of knowledge. Then so you can say, in this essay we're going to focus on two areas of knowledge, which are A and B. Okay, whatever you choose. Okay, and then you state your thesis. Okay, so thesis means like your overarching argument, okay, about the essay. Okay, then paragraph 2. So paragraph 2, 3, 4, you focus on the first area of knowledge. So for example, if your first area of knowledge is history, then paragraph 2, 3, 4 are all about history. Okay, so then paragraph 2, this will be a short paragraph. You state your knowledge questions. So what are the knowledge questions you want to explore with regards to history? Okay, so paragraph 2. Then paragraph 3, you state a claim, okay, to answer your knowledge question. And then be sure, of course, in paragraph 3, you have to develop your claim, and you need to have examples as well. Okay. Then paragraph 4, it's your counterclaim. Okay, so yeah, counterclaim means the opposite argument. Okay, and then you have examples as well, and then you have a mini conclusion. So mini conclusion means conclusion with regards to the first area of knowledge, right? So paragraph 2, 3, 4 is all about the first area of knowledge. Okay, you state your knowledge question, you have to claim, counterclaim, and you have a conclusion that is specific to the first area of knowledge. Then paragraph 5, 6, 7, you basically do the same thing as 2, 3, and 4, but you do it on your, sorry, there's a typo here, the second area of knowledge. Okay, so paragraph 5, 6, and 7 is basically the same as 2, 3, 4, but you do it for your second area of knowledge. Then your paragraph 8, you have a conclusion for your entire essay. Okay, so this is essentially how we believe it's best for your essay to be structured. Okay, very clear. Okay, very structured. Okay, so now let's look at. So as I said, so the question we're answering is this one, right? Avoiding bias seems a commendable goal, but this fails to recognize the positive role that bias can play in the pursuit of knowledge. So this question is really about bias. Is bias good or bad? Essentially, like is bias really a commendable goal, and does bias play a positive role? So this is what we're trying to explore in our essay, 1,600 words. Okay, so let's look at the introduction. So I'll walk through paragraph by paragraph. So introduction. So you first introduce your essay prompt. So you can just say, in this essay we're trying to answer so don't use like pronouns. So you should say like, in this essay, the essay prompt of blah 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 will be answered. Okay, then you can define the key terms. Okay, so in terms of the definitions, like it can be widened or narrowed to fit your knowledge claims, right? Like but these are the definitions we would recommend. Okay, so the first is bias. So bias refers to a prejudice in favor or against certain objects or people, often considered to be unfair or unsound judgment. Okay, so you can define bias. So that's obviously a very clear concept stated in the question, right? So commendable goal. So you can then define commendable goal. So the commendable goal refers to a praiseworthy and admirable objective during the pursuit of knowledge, often considered from the objective of other knowers in the same areas of knowledge, or as a conventional belief held by most people. Okay, then you can define, so positive role of bias in the pursuit of knowledge. You can say Um, this may obviously differ from area of knowledge to area of knowledge, right? So it's different in different areas of knowledge, right? But so if bias can help acquire more valuable knowledge, then one can argue that bias plays a positive role. Okay, so this is what I would say. Okay, so then you can explore the areas of knowledge that will be explored. So you can say explain the areas of knowledge that will be explored. So you can say in this essay, the areas of knowledge that will be explored are A and B, right? So in for our essay, we chose to focus on arts and history. So we would be saying, oh, we'll focus. So that's what we'll write. Okay, we're in this TOK essay, the areas of knowledge to be focused on is arts and history. Okay, then then you basically state your thesis. So this is the thesis that we have. Okay, in arts, avoiding bias is often not a commendable goal, but often considers is often not yeah. Avoiding bias is often not a commendable goal, but rather considers a certain amount of bias having a positive role. Okay, so we're trying. So basically, the point is that in arts, bias avoiding bias is not commendable. So a certain degree of bias can have a positive role. In history, avoiding bias is often commendable in order to obtain a fair examination of past events. But this does not exclude the value of bias in historical discussions. So what this means is that um, avoiding bias is is a commendable goal generally. So people generally want to avoid bias in history, but it does not exclude the value of bias in historical discussion. Um, so it still appreciates the role of bias in historical discussions. Okay, so this is what we will write in the introduction. So basically, what you do is define terms, explain the areas of knowledge that will be explored, and state your thesis. Okay, with regards to the two areas of knowledge. First area of knowledge we will focus on um, is the arts, right? So if we go back to the structure, we finish the introduction. Now we're going to state the knowledge question. Then we're going to state our claim and our counterclaim in 3 paragraphs. Okay, so let's look at the knowledge questions first. So the knowledge question is obviously links to the essay prompt. So you can say, but just focus on an area of knowledge. So if I were writing this essay, I would say the first area of knowledge to be focused on is the arts. The knowledge question that will be answered is, to what extent is avoiding bias a commendable goal in the arts, and to what extent does bias play a positive role in the pursuit of knowledge in the arts, right? So basically just stating the knowledge question. This will be a short paragraph. Then we go into our knowledge claim, right? So knowledge claim means the argument that we have. Okay, we're developing our first argument. So what we would say is that in the arts, avoiding bias is not necessarily a commendable goal when the use of emotions and intuition are the preferred ways of knowing, right? So yeah, that's pretty obvious, right? Because in the arts, it's about the emotions, it's about intuition as being the primary ways of knowing. And in these cases, bias allows us to gain original and valuable knowledge instead, right? So yeah, so we're trying to say that, so the first point we'll make in our explanation is that emotion and intuition are often the dominant ways of knowing in the arts, and in fact, emotion and intuition often forms our bias, right? So by using emotion and intuition as the ways of knowing, we automatically incorporate bias into our thinking, right? We are prone to be affected by bias, right? So in the arts, work are often often evaluated according to how well it expresses the artist's feeling or how the viewers feel about it, right? So that's very obvious. I think there are a lot of examples for this. Like different people have different people from different cultures have vastly different tastes in music, right? So it's just like how in arts, a piece of work, it could be music, it could be an artwork. It's often it it is there's a big difference between how different people interpret it because it's based on different people's backgrounds and their cultural upbringing, really. Because emotion and intuition are the main ways of knowing that people use to evaluate art, and that these ways of knowing are heavily impacted by a person's bias, right? So yeah, so for example, like the difference between music and noise depends on what sounds right to the listener, right? Like for example, uh, like a lot of traditional people feel that heavy metal is noise rather than music, but clearly the fans of heavy metal would not agree with it. Okay, so this is just to help you to understand. So examples. So there are two examples we include here, right? Like music. What? So this is. So yeah, we will recommend you to write. You use music as an example, right? So I guess heavy metal would be a good example, like we stated just now. Or you can use any example. Just the example that shows how people have very different musical tastes depending on different not okay very different evaluation towards a musical piece depending on their cultural background, right? Because when we use emotion and intuition as the ways of knowing, we're very prone to being biased, and this is acceptable in the arts, right? Another example you can use is more unique. So there's actually an artist called Marina Abramovich. You can find this on YouTube. So she actually has this artwork that is called "The Artist is Present," right? So in this piece of artwork, quote unquote artwork, the artist sits at a table in the museum and invite the viewers to basically stare at her and communicate with her in silence, right? Uh, so a lot of people, because of her story, a lot of people like value this piece of artwork, right? But it is so you can basically take a look. So it's basically like that. This is the artwork. 12.5 hours, 6 days a week, motionless. So pretty strange, right? So what you can say is that visually the piece of artwork is nothing extraordinary, but then a lot of people praised it because of the emotions they felt when they sat in the chair. So this has to do with the bias they have towards the artist herself, right? Because she probably has a very deep history. You can do more research on this, right? So yeah, so this is like an example of how so for example, if I went to a museum and I did what Marina did, nobody's gonna come because I'm not famous and people don't feel anything special about me, right? But I mean, for her, because she probably has a very special background and there's a story behind this whole show, so that's why people actually appreciate this kind of artwork, right? So there's a lot of example. Like for example, like there are a lot of paintings that are worth tens of millions of dollars that a lot of people may consider nothing extraordinary, right? But then those paintings could be worth tens of millions of dollars to those who can appreciate the meaning in the artwork, right? So that's why so the point here is that uh, when we evaluate pieces of art, we use intuition and we use emotion, and hence this introduces bias into our thinking, right? Okay, then we go on to our counterclaim, right? So the counterclaim is basically the opposite argument. So here we're trying to argue that bias may not always play a part, because in the claim we're saying that in arts bias is good, right? Bias is what we need, right? But here we're saying bias may not always play a positive role, and avoiding bias can at times become a commendable goal. So we can appreciate arts comprehensively, right? So not having bias at times can help us to appreciate art. Okay, so why is that? So we can say that. So here's how we would explain it, right? So uh, when if we use emotion and intuition solely when we try to appreciate a piece of art, right? We can be so much affected by our biased views that we have an unfair judgment towards a piece of art, right? So removing bias can help us to have more fair judgment on art pieces, and having bias can actually prevent us from finding out these truths, right? So what are some examples? Okay, so the first example is that there was this piece of artwork by Picasso. This is what our research team found, right? that shocked viewers in 1916, right? Because it depicted 5 naked prostitutes and it depicted women in a non-feminist way. Because at that time, gender roles were very clearly defined, obviously, right? About 100 years ago. So nowadays, this piece of work is seen as one of his best pieces of art, right? But at the time, because people had their cultural and moral biases, right? A lot of viewers did not appreciate this piece of artwork at the time because uh, they had these biases that due to their culture and their moral judgment, right? So this is how like bias can cause us to not appreciate a piece of art as much as it possibly as it should be, right? So there's another example that our research team found. Like there's this piece of music called Stravinsky's Rite of Spring in 1913, right? So it used pulsating rhythm and dissonant chords, right? So so I don't exactly know what this means, but then it's basically some type of musical innovation, right? At that time, it was poorly reviewed, right? People did not like it because it was a new kind of music. People were not used to it, right? Right? People have their intuition to music that and that this piece of music that did not feel right at that time. But then now it is seen as it became a masterpiece basically. Later, as people's biases lessened, as people got more used to this kind of music, they really learn to appreciate it, right? So you can see how having strong bias can cause us to fail to appreciate a piece of artwork, right? So now we write a mini conclusion. So we have had our claim and our counterclaim in arts, so we want to conclude with regards to arts, right? So you can say avoiding bias entirely is not considered a commendable goal in arts, right? So there's no way we can avoid bias entirely because we use intuition and emotion as our ways of knowing. And therefore some form of bias is preferred. However, stubborn and fixated bias might hinder us from appreciating all forms of art and style, right? Yeah, so I think this makes sense. So the whole idea here is that, for example, if I listen to like country music my entire life, I might feel that all rock music is bad, is crap. But then it by having this bias, it stops me from appreciating all forms of art, right? So I guess this is the statement we're trying to make here. Okay. Okay. So now the second area of knowledge you can consider, we will consider is history, right? So just now we go back to the structure. So we are here. We're in the second area of knowledge. So first we state our knowledge question. Then we go to our claim and develop our claim, and then develop our counterclaim, right? Okay, so what is the knowledge question? So you can say for history, the knowledge question that will be explored are: to what extent is avoiding bias a commendable goal in history? And if yes, does this exclude the role played by bias in history? So should bias play no role in the development of historical knowledge, right? So the first knowledge claim is that we're supporting the fact that there should be no bias in history. So so you can say on one hand, avoiding bias is a commendable goal in history, as bias could negatively hamper both the process of acquiring knowledge and the quality of acquired knowledge, right? So this is like the obvious point, right? Like in history, we see history. So history is supposed to be like a objective, objective representation and evaluation of the past, like ideally, right? So bias can play a negative role in the pursuit of knowledge in this area of knowledge. So in this knowledge can we're against bias, right? So basically the point here is that history by nature requires knowers to interpret historical fact and generate reasonable understanding of past events, right? So past events are something that happened objectively, right? Like there's a truth, right? Something happened in the past, right? So history demands knowers to give a fair and objective view based on past events. So ideally, there should be a fair and objective view on past events through the use of reasons and knowledge, these two ways of knowing, right? So if so the point here is that if historical knowledge is highly biased, it can have a negative impact on society, because it means that society have an inaccurate view of past events, right? So one example is Columbus Day. So Columbus Day is basically when the Europeans set foot on North America, which is now the United States and Canada, right? So uh, his like historically, this have been called the Discovery Day, right? Like Europeans called this the uh, the Discovery Day. So it shed a very positive light on this event, right? So, but however, recently there's basically a pushback, right? Um, so now there have been arguments that about the oppression that the Europeans caused the Native Americans, right? Um, so some historians now argue that calling it Discovery Day is an unfair representation, right? Because because in fact it is there's oppression towards the Native Americans, right? Okay, so by calling it Discovery Day, it ignores the oppression towards the Native Americans. So that's why some people think. So in a way, some historians argue that calling it a discovery is unfair, right? So in fact, this happens a lot of times, right? This happens a lot in history, right? So there is a lack of history from the minority of the less powerful, right? So in fact, the country that wins the war normally determines the narrative, right? So for example, uh, in the case of Columbus Day, right? Um, you know, Europeans won the war against Native Americans, and eventually they occupied the entire North America, right? So so yeah, so that's why Europeans dominated the historical narrative, right? So you can say that uh, you know history is often biased by towards the party or the country that wins the war. That is the dominant power, right? On the other hand, there's a lack of representation by the minority, right? So this can often lead to a bias in historical knowledge, which is undesirable because um, it leads to a inaccurate representation of historical facts, right? So I guess you should get the idea. Counterclaim. So the counterclaim is that although avoiding bias is undoubtedly a commendable goal in history, this does not mean that bias does not play a positive role in the pursuit of knowledge, right? So the point here is that bias in human judgment is inevitable, and exchanging different views can encourage intellectual progress that improves history, right? To the counterclaim. So the counterclaim here is that avoiding bias is undoubtedly a commendable goal in history, but then this does not mean that bias does not play a positive role in the pursuit of knowledge in history, right? So bias in human judgment is inevitable, and exchanging different views can lead to intellectual progress and exchange in progress, right? So the point here is that ultimately historians need to come up with their own interpretation on judgment on past events. So it is not possible for them to do so without any bias, right? Um, because different people have different cultural backgrounds and the sources they have access to can be different, right? But then the discussions between historians from different biases can lead to uh, improved knowledge in history, right? So the point is that different historians inevitably will have their own biases because they have different cultural backgrounds, they have access to different information, right? But then, if historians are able to consider to exchange their ideas, uh, uh, this can ultimately lead to better understanding of history, right? And you can also say that historians need to consider different sources, and these sources are often biased by nature. So, for example, historians may look at newspapers from the time during which during which the history takes place, right? So for example, if we're studying, the Cold War, we may look at newspaper accounts during that time, and these sources are often biased, of course, right? So, and historians' objective is to get an unbiased understanding from these different sources, but it is almost impossible for them to do so without bias at all, right? Okay, sorry. So yeah, so what are the examples here? So you can use Cold War as an example, right? So you can say that there are three waves of historical explanation of Cold War. So at first, there was the orthodox approach. So at first, historians in the U.S. think that USSR is solely responsible for the Cold War, right? And then later, this view was being challenged by revisionist historians, which think that the U.S. is the cause of the Cold War. And then later, there was a wave of historians who believed that it was actually nobody's fault. The Cold War was inevitable, and this was the view called post-revisionism. So these views were largely affected by political and social factors at that time, right? And so these views were all biased, but then as they interacted with each other, it leads to a more complete understanding of history, right? So the point is that history evolves, right? So historians will definitely have a bias that is impacted by the social norms and the political and social factors at the time. But historians, as they exchange their ideas, which are often biased in nature, this can advance the understanding of history and lead to a more comprehensive understanding, right? Yeah, so you can also talk about the theory of historical relativism. So the point is that this theory states that there is no objective truth in history, but they are relative to the context. So they depend on the context that the historians are situated in, right? So the social and political factors at the time would definitely play a role in how historians interpret certain information, right? So then you can write your mini conclusion for the history as an area of knowledge. So you can say in history, avoiding bias is often commendable, right? Because historians aim to have a objective understanding of historical events, but then bias is also inevitable. So if we strive to avoid bias, then so bias can help us to facilitate different views and discussions, right? Okay, so this is the point in history. So in your conclusion, basically this is the easiest paragraph. Basically, you just restate what you said earlier just summarize your arguments and your conclusion for the two areas of knowledge. So you can say that the arts and history are very different by nature, and then you can talk about how in the arts the use of emotion and intuition are normally used, but then in history the use of reason is normally used, right? So then you can restate the arguments or the conclusions that you made for history and arts, right? So there's not too much that's special here, right? So you just need to restate your arguments in your conclusion. Okay, so hope that you find this video is useful, and as I said just now, you can register for a trial lesson if you need help on any IB subjects, and you can get a sample essay from us. Okay, so see you next time.